Right, well, welcome to part 7 of the multi-language adventure game. It's been a long time since I've done any work with this, so apologies for that. I've now got a Github repository. I did start this off a couple of years ago when I was doing it, but I never actually put any code on it. There is some PDFs on the setting up the IDEs. There's a document here which shows the game setup plan as what we're doing to create our 4 locations and some of the objects and things. And I've now actually put the first stage of code on, which is what we'll be looking at today. What I've done, if I show you, if we start with the Python, which is the subject of today's video, you'll see we've got 4 files here and then this library one. Now the library one consists of console.py and kboard.py. I'll get rid of that PyCache in a minute. So you can just simply copy and paste the contents of these 2 files. There is a series of videos about this keyboard and console classes on a different playlist, which goes into more detail about what they do and how they work. So I won't go into it here, but you'll need to copy the contents of these to your own project. So let me just get back to that, and then the ones that you see here are what we're going to be going through today. So a couple of options. One is I will go through this fairly slowly so that you can, if you wish, simply watch, see what we're doing, and copy the code as you see it here, or you can simply download it from the GitHub repository, so whichever you find most useful. So let me just close all of these off. So the console and keyboard are, as I showed you, on the GitHub repository. So we're going to be dealing with 4 files today. I'll start with the main one, which is of course where everything runs from. I called it main.py because if you are using Replit to do your Python coding in, the basic first file that you're given in Replit when you start a new project is called main.py. So I thought, okay, let's leave it at that. So you can put this code into Replit and it will run quite successfully. So let's get through what we're doing. So this stage, all we've done is a layout of ideas for doing the adventure. There's not a lot in it. I've put in here what we're actually doing in this first stage. You'll notice here that we've got a couple of imports. We've got lib.kboard as kb and lib.console as console. Now the reason for the lib dot is because they're in a folder here called lib. So we've got lib console and lib kboard, hence lib kboard, lib console. These are the files you can download directly from the GitHub repository, because I don't intend to go through those. There's quite a lot of code in those. But even if you call them a different name, make sure that however you spell and whatever name you give them is copied exactly here and here as you have the actual file name, including the case. Although Windows is not fussed about case as far as filing is concerned, when you're importing things it must be spelt exactly the same as the file name. So what we're effectively doing is to bring in external files that we have written into this main.py. We've also got to import the other 4 files. So this is the main files there. So we're importing game, narrator and shared. So we'll go through those in stages. So far I've set this up. If I just drop that down a little bit, So this more or less just fits on one page. So there's not a lot you need to copy and put into your own project. It's got the imports up here. There are no variables defined at the top here, and then we've got three functions. We've got def play, take action, and of course main. What I've done here is to put a little doc string in to describe what each of these functions does, and then we've got a call here to main. So when this is first started off, it's going to go to main, jump up to here, and then go through all this stuff here. So let's show you what this does in a moment, but let me just, before we do that, I'll just show you the contents of these other files here. So let's start with shared. So shared is just a simple file with 7 variables, and we're not at the moment using any of these, but they're in there so that they're ready for use at a later date. I've set this debug to true so that as we are running our game, we can have certain parts that show additional information on the screen to help you debug and make sure it's all running correctly. We'll go through that as and when. And I've got this dictionary called game states. Those of you who have done some Python at school or whatever will be aware of lists. Dictionaries slightly different in that you are using a word as the index, and then in this case a number. So the game states are basically 0, 1, 2 and 3, but they're given the index, menu, play, dead and quit, so that it's easier to handle. For example, the current game state by default is set to game states menu, which means that its value is 0. So that's how dictionaries work. So we'll be using those a bit more. So that's the shared one. Now the narrator, obviously you can put whatever code or text you like in here. I called it narrator so that as you're playing the game, this is kind of almost the narrator in the background telling you the story. So for example, the introduction here, the most epic adventure game ever, coded by myself. Can you escape the dungeon? So we've got 3 separate strings inside a list, and the same with the data one and the greeting one, the start one, and the death message is only that's 2 strings again there, and the end message. So it's just a single string in there, but it's still in a list. So when you're making your own game, obviously you can change all of this, and more importantly, when we get to the point where we're loading this in from file, then each game that we make will have different text to describe and get you going on the game. So this is the sort of text that the narrator will be showing on the screen. Where you see the open brackets and something like that in there, you'll see the use of that later. We're kind of mimicking the way that you can use interpolated strings, which we'll get into shortly. So in this case, they are just embedded inside the string. So this, if you print that out, it will print it out exactly as you see it there, but it's interpreted later to get information out of it. So we'll deal with that. So that's my narrator texts, but obviously you can change all of this if you wish. Next we'll do the game. So again, we're importing local files, and I've put in this one simple variable, which is a delay of 2 seconds. Of course, you can change that as you wish, and we'll see what that does as we're playing. And I've put some definitions in here, but with no actual code in. By just putting in a doc string, that prevents the interpreter from grumbling because there's no code. So we don't have to put the word pass in, even though there's no code in here. This docstring is good enough. That will just kind of reserve the space for these various things here. So I'll just wind those down slowly. So that's right at the top, and then you can pause and copy that down if you wish, and then we'll go to that one, and again you can pause and copy that as you wish, and then finally down the bottom. Okay, so that's our files gone through. So let's go back to main, and what we'll do is we'll step through this so that you can see what it does. It doesn't actually do much at all, but it'll just show you the steps that we're going through. So if I hit the play button there, the console has briefly come up. It's a bit big. I'll just shrink that down. That'll do. Tuck that out the way. So we're on main. So if I press is it F7 or F10 on wing, I can never remember. Debug. Step into, yeah. It says F11, which is the same as Visual Studio. I thought it was a different one here. Anyway, F11 it is. So we'll press F11. And so it's gone into obviously the main function. So we started off down here on line 34. We've gone up to main, and we've now got this row equals console.clear. So let's press F11 there, and we'll jump into the console library, which is here. F11. So we're now inside the console library. There's a full explanation on a separate video which I'll make a link to on how the console class works. But basically it's already been initialized, because the moment you make a reference to it, some of these variables that you see up here have already been set. So is console is true. If you see where my mouse is hovering over it, it's got the word true, because the console has been initialized to find out whether it's running in an IDE or in a console, and it's knowing it's running in a console. So F11 again, it says if the operating system name is NT, which is for Windows, and if I hover my mouse over it, let's get the right bit, NT. So we're running in Windows, so we're going to call OS system CLS. If we're not in Windows, then it's OS system clear. If you run this in Replit, it will use OS system clear, because it finds that it's not in Windows on a web-based Replit, obviously. It's F11 here, so we're clearing the screen, and obviously that doesn't make any difference because it was already clear. Then we'll F11 again. It helps when I click it on here. So we're returned a 0, so the row number is now 0. I'll just quickly shoot back to that console one. So where we did our clear, we returned 0, so that the number of rows, or the row that we're currently on, is row 0, which of course is the top row of the console. Now it's asking if game.load game, so we're now going to call the game library over here and find the function called load game. So let's skip to that one, press F11. The load game is now going to call this display intro, and it's using the Narrator folder or file that I showed you earlier. So it's going to print out Narrator intro. So if we hit F11, it should go up to this display intro up here, which it does. Now there's a secondary function built inside, so this is like a sub function. So we've got the main one here, display intro, and we've got this sub function built in underneath. The reason for doing that is that this particular function is only ever used within display intro. So if you make it a sub-function, it'll go through the code within the main function and keep coming back to this as and when it needs to. So it's going to ignore it for the moment because we haven't called it. So let's press F11. So again, we're going to clear the console. I don't need to step through that because we know it does that. Well, yeah, let's do it. Let's hit F11. Blah, blah, blah. Right, so we've got we're now going to go through this intro text, which has got two elements. So I can hover my mouse over it. The intro text is combined of a list. The first one says the most epic adventure game ever, and the second one says coded by Inksaver, and the third one says can you escape the dungeon. So what it's going to do, because it's inside a for loop, is to go through each of those three separate strings, and instead of printing them out at this stage, is just checking the length of those strings. So we've got size is currently set to 0. So each time this loop runs, it will increase the value of size depending on the length of the string. So let's just quickly flick through those. There we go. So size has now been increased to 34. So it's 34 characters long, which is the longest of those three strings that were put in there. You'll see the reason for that in just a moment. We're now going to add 12 to the size. So the size was 34, so we add 12. So size should now be 46. There it is. And now we're going to print the top of the box. So you see how it is here? So we're using this UTF-8 character. I have put these inside the, I believe it's the console library at the top. Yes, so they're in here, so you can copy and paste them without having to start looking them up and trying to get hold of them or putting in some obscure keys into the keyboard just to get them. So where were we on game? Right, so we're doing this box top by using this somewhat more complicated piece of code here. So we've got lowercase f with a single quote. Now this is the interpolated string, so it means that I can put stuff inside these curly braces, and it will then deal with the formula or the string or whatever we happen to put inside those curly braces and include it in the overall string. So what we've done here is that we want to left justify an empty string to the size, which we've already said is 46, using this sort of top, looks like an equal sign, which is the UTF-8 character which fills in here. So we're going to create a line that starts with the corner piece here, does a line, and then finishes with the final corner piece here. So if I press the enter key, sorry, not enter key, the F11, that will get this stuff stored in box top. If I hover the mouse out of it, you can see we've got this long line there. We're going to do exactly the same thing for box bottom. I hover the mouse over there, we've got the box bottom. We're now going to print the box top, F11, and if I bring the console back in, there we are, we've printed that. Then F11 again, and it's going to go through each string in our introduction text and print it out. So if I go F11 again, oops, wrong one, and over here helps. So F11, so it's going to print the next string, which is the most epic adventure game ever, and this is where it uses our inbuilt secondary function up here. So we're calling now format line with passing it in this string, which is the most epic adventure game ever. So let's press F11 and it will go up to here. So there's the text, the most epic adventure game ever, and the length of that text is 46. It's then checking whether the length of that text divided by 2 has a remainder of 1, which means it's an odd number, and if so, it's going to add a space. So let's press F11. As it happens, it's an even length, so that it ignored that. And then we want to create a series of spaces which are the length of which will be based on the length of the text that we're passing in and this kind of overall length that we've already calculated. So that will give us a filler. So if I press F11 again and I hover over the filler, we've got, it's about 4 or 5 spaces, as you can see, showing up on the tooltip there. And now we're going to return from this sort of mini function a piece of text which consists of the filler string, the text itself, and another filler string bordered by these 2 UTF-8 characters. So if I press F11, that will return it back down to here, and it's going to print that out. Let's press F11 again, and we'll show you. There's the output, the most epic adventure game ever. And then we're going to repeat that with any other lines within the input, and then finally the box bottom, and then we'll sleep for 3 seconds. So if I press the go key, and we'll go right down to line 56 here, that's the output, as you can see. Compared with what you first saw on the first video of this series, I've improved and changed the code quite a lot, so it looks a little bit better, a little bit more professional than it used to. So you've got quite a nice little sort of intro box there. So these were each of those 3 separate lines. They've all been made so they sit in the middle of that box. So we sleep for 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. There we are. And then we're going to clear the console, which we've done before. And then this is our load game as finished. We've displayed the narration. At the moment, we're not loading an actual game. This is just to kind of to start things off. So that will just return true. This would normally be based on the results of trying to load in a game from file or whatever. So at the moment, I've just hard coded in true. So press F11, and that's back there. So the game load game is okay. It returned true. So obviously we're going to run down here. So this is where the game loop starts. Had that not succeeded, we had not managed to load the game, then this would simply have dropped down here, and it would have asked us press enter to quit. Job done. Game finished. But as it successfully loaded, in inverted commas, the game, we're now going to run the game loop. Now, the shared game state, if you recall, we already set as 0, which is menu. But we're going to set it here again to the play version. So the shared game state at the moment is 0. And that's going to set it, if I can hover over it. So you've got menu 0, play 1, dead 2, quit 3. So we're going to set it to play, which is 1. So if I press F11, then the shared game state is now 1. So while the shared game state is equal to 1, which is the play, it's going to play. So it's going to go round and round and round and round, calling this play function. So that is our game loop. There it is. So while the game state is equal to play, we play. As soon as that changes, maybe it changes to quit or menu or whatever you want to change it to, then that will finish, the game loop finishes, and then you print out your messages and go. So let's go to play. We'll press F11. So we're going to the play function now. All that does at this stage is to set the game state from play to quit. So game state at the moment is 1, so we press F11 and the game state becomes 3. So we get back down to here. The game state is no longer equal to 1, so this loop will finish. We're going to clear the console, and then we're going to print the messages inside the narrator end message. So we can see what the narrator end message is. It says, "Thank you for playing. Remember to smash that like button and subscribe." I wonder where that came from. And then, of course, we just print each one of those as before. So let's do that. Let's put that down to, I think we'll put it just to here, and then we'll There we go. Let's drag that across. Stretch it out for a little bit. That's better. So it says, thank you for playing. Remember to smash that like button and subscribe. So we're now on this line. If I just press that one to get it down here, it's now checking if we're inside a console, which we are, which is true, then it will put this input enter to quit. If we were doing this inside an IDE, inside idle, inside, if I was setting it so the output was not in a console, this wouldn't happen. It would just, the game would now finish. So let's just press F11 to continue that. And of course, up here, we've now got enter to quit. So that is basically, at the moment, all of this, what this game does. So this entire main section just uses a small part of the game. I'll get back to it. This one, which just basically sort of plays the introduction, and that's about it. Does this little fancy box and finishes. So we're not actually playing anything, but it does show you how it can, by importing all these files, you can jump between the files that you have got in your project. So each one does a different thing. So if you're relatively new to Python, you're studying it at school, you probably won't have been introduced into multiple files. But it's definitely worth doing, because this keyboard file can now be used in any project you want that requires user input. So I'll just briefly show you that one. It's quite a lot of lines, nearly 200, but it does get guaranteed results. There's some explanations of how it works here. So, I mean, if you want to kind of type this in yourself, you're very welcome to do so, but it's probably easier just to use it and test out how it works. So that's the first stage of our adventure game in Python that doesn't actually